You're listening to the Overcome Your Limits radio show, hosted by top motivational speaker, Christopher E. Powell. We'll be bringing you thought-provoking interviews, information, and inspiration from people from all walks of life, including business, finance, education, and ordinary individuals who have conquered tremendous odds to achieve great success. Tune in regularly to get the insight, inspiration, and motivation you need to dramatically improve your life and make a difference in the lives of others. Now, here's your host, Chris Powell.
Welcome to the Overcome Your Limits radio show. I'm Chris Powell, and thank you once again for joining us today for another edition of the Overcome Your Limits radio show broadcast. Please join our conversation on Facebook at facebook.com/overcomeyourlimits and also on Twitter at twitter.com/overcomeyourlimits. You also can leave your comment on our overcomeyourlimits.com website. On today's show, we will be talking about resilience. Jim Davidson is a high-altitude climber, best-selling author, and international speaker who shares stories distilled from a lifetime of mountain adventures and rescues. As a mountaineer and expeditioning for 32 years, Jim is an expert in resilience. Along the way, he endured an incredible mountain survival situation. His epic tale and the lessons he learned from it are shared in Jim's memoir, The Ledge, an inspirational story of friendship and survival, which was selected one of the best books of the year by Amazon and won the National Outdoor Book Award for outdoor literature. Jim's survival story is so compelling that it was made into an episode of the international hit TV series I Shouldn't Be Alive, which is broadcast on the Discovery Network. Jim shares uplifting messages about resilience and perseverance that inspires people to overcome challenges and to reach the summits in their life and work. Would you please welcome to the Overcome Your Limits radio show, Jim Davidson. Hello, Jim, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be with you today.
You are an expert when it comes to resiliency training, and you give workshops and speeches, and beyond that, you've had an incredible story that I know our audience is going to really be fascinated by. So I really would just like to get started with your story and more about you. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, you are an avid mountain climber, and I wanted to know, how did you get involved in mountain climbing and what inspires you to do this?
Oh, it's a good question. I think my interest in mountain climbing came from two directions. My father had a painting company, so at a very young age I started climbing ladders. By the time I was 12 years old, I was walking on roofs. By the time I was 16 years old, I was climbing on structural steel and high-voltage electrical towers. So I got used to climbing and being in precarious positions even when I was a young person. And then I started developing a love of the outdoors. I started hiking, I started backpacking and fishing and canoeing. And I figured out if I combined these two things, climbing up things with the outdoors, I could get the excitement of both of those by mountain climbing. So I was about 19 years old. I started rock climbing, then went on to snow and ice climbing, and then went on to climbing high-altitude mountains. And I've been a climber for 32 years now, and I just love it.
That is very inspiring. And I think I remember that. I read that you were pretty close to some electrical voltage or currents when you were painting your dad some.
You have a good memory, yes. When I was about 18, my dad had a job where we would climb and paint high-voltage electrical towers, as you say. They were 80 to 200 feet tall, all kinds of pieces of metal welded together, and we would have to climb up and paint the metal, but the electrical lines had so much voltage because they were feeding a whole county. There was 230,000 volts running through the lines, and they couldn't shut the electricity off. So we would have to climb close to, but not too close, to the wires so that we could paint all the steel. and you could feel the electricity creeping through your hands and kind of stinging your hands a little bit like fire ants. And we would have to watch out for each other and learn to trust one another and learn how to do a dangerous job by trusting each other and by watching each other's back. So all those things I learned working on my dad's painting company, I took those things with me to the mountains, and I applied them in the same setting of working with small groups under dangerous conditions and not giving up just because it's difficult. And those things served me very well as a mountain climber and in life.
Oh, definitely. I understand how important it is to take challenges. And if you want to have big goals, big challenges are going to face you.
You bet.
If there's no resistance in what you want to do, you may have to rethink your goal because anything worth having is worth having to struggle for. One question I want to ask you was about your conditioning was, I know if you climb mountains, or I think you also did running like I used to run. You did like a half marathon. And I want to ask you about physical conditioning and what is really needed to climb mountains with such high heights. And really, which is more challenging, the physical component or the mental, or could it be both?
Yeah, it is both. I think it goes like this. You have to do hard physical work before you go to the climb to get your body ready, and you also have to do training under adverse conditions. When you're already tired from yesterday's climb, you go back out and climb again today to teach yourself to climb when you're tired. We go out when the weather's very bad. We do very long distances that we're not sure we can make. So we're actually putting ourselves in situations where we're basically beating ourselves down. We jokingly call those sufferfest or suffering day. We're going out intentionally to beat ourselves into the ground because the physical conditioning is important for sure, but there's going to come a time on a big challenge or on a big mountain when the physical conditioning won't be enough. You're going to hit that point of exhaustion, and yet there's still more work to do, still more mountain to climb, and that's when the mental conditioning comes in. And so you do need both, but frankly, I think if your mental conditioning is good enough, you can overcome any shortcomings in your physical conditioning. And I know you've had to work out hard in your life as well to get strong, to get through your day, and you know that it's not very fun when you're doing it, when you're in pain and you're sweating, but that kind of physical strengthening and mental conditioning, that's what gives you the endurance later on when you really need it.
Oh, definitely. I can attest to running. I've done a few fun runs. It's called fun run, 1 mile, or maybe like a 3K or 5K. And I know how painful it can be, but I can only imagine. I really can't even imagine getting ready to climb a mountain and how much work that takes. But I think what you said is so important, that you have to push yourself a little bit beyond your goal. So that way, when you begin your goal, you've already mentally gone past it. So it just makes that mental aspect already completed. So that's really inspiring. And also, it's a great way to train for such a high challenge.
It's almost like putting money in the bank in case you need it later. By training hard now, you put that money in the bank, both physically and mentally, so that later on, when you have to make withdrawals from yourself, when it gets tough, you've got those reserves built up. And so that's the way I look at it is you've got to do the hard work now, you've got to do the savings now to make sure you've got enough later to get the job done.
Excellent advice. But Jim, you mentioned in life as well as in business and even mountain climbing that there will be storms that we will have to deal with. How important is it for us to realize when trying to accomplish big goals, like we just mentioned a couple seconds ago, that there will be big challenges? Yeah,
I think you make a real good point. I think it's really critical because I'll talk first the climbing world and then about life. In climbing, the weather changes. It rains, it snows, and if you go on a multi-day climb, or in the case of the big Himalayan mountains, sometimes multiple weeks and even multiple months on these climbs, inevitably it's going to storm. If you don't expect that, when it happens, it can feel really bad, and you get scared, and you start to doubt yourself, and you're not sure how you're going to get through the storm. So instead of letting that surprise you and bring you down, you have to realize those storms are going to happen. And so the question is, when the storm comes, what are you going to do before the storm to be ready? What are you going to do during the storm to keep your morale and your spirits and momentum up, even though you're maybe pinned down in a tent? And when the storm clears, how are you going to regain your activity and start going back up the mountain again? And the same thing happens in life. We'd all like to have a nice life where everything just keeps going great and smooth and all the way to the very end till that last day. But as you know, and your listeners probably know, life doesn't work that way. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be illnesses and family problems and money problems. And so it's almost like trying to keep a positive attitude, but knowing there will be a storm down the road, and it won't be very fun when it happens, but we will get through it. We will go back to climbing again, making forward fun progress in life. But during that storm, you're going to have to endure that storm and then be ready to move again. So I think that knowing it's coming and being mentally prepared for it, that way it avoids the surprise and it avoids any emotional letdowns that happen when the storm finally arrives during your climb or in your life.
I love what you just said, because I think initially when we have a goal, we always say, wow, when it's complete, or I can see it happening,
right.
I'm going to be excited and
right.
just overjoyed and all this euphoria. But guess what? In order to get there, as you just mentioned,
yep.
you got to have the patience.
Exactly. Yeah, you might go to college and you can see yourself getting that diploma, or you get that big job and you can't wait to get that big check, but there's time in the library. There's time at the desk. There's time with a shovel in your hand. You've got to do those things in order to get where you want to go. So, yeah, you got to be willing to do that work again, like we've talked about.
But, Jim, you are incredible. One of your biggest achievements was that you reached the summit of Mount Rainier, which is in Washington. It's 14,410 feet.
Correct.
I mean, I get tired just saying it.
I get tired on them too, so I know how you feel.
But on the way down the mountain, you became trapped inside an 80-foot glacial crevice. Now,
yep.
This is very, very deep.
Yeah.
Could you explain to our audience what you were facing? Because I know it was tremendous. And the emotions that you were experiencing?
Yeah, it was the most difficult thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I'd been a climber about 10 years, and my climbing partner Mike had been a climber for about 14 years, so we're experienced climbers. We climbed this icy mountain, as you say, Mount Rainier, up to 14,410 feet. And on the way down, we were going down a glacier, so we're tied together with a rope, and we're going down the glacier, moving together, poking the ground in front of us so we can feel where the snow and ice is. And on these glaciers, there's big cracks called crevasses, and you pronounced it correctly. Some people say crevice, but the word is actually crevasse. And that crevasse in front of us was covered over with a layer of snow. All the snow looked the same, but when I stepped onto it, the snow collapsed. It's called a snow bridge. It collapsed and dropped me in 80 feet in the crevasse. My partner Mike was tied to me 50 feet behind me. He slowed me down, but he couldn't stop me because the snow was just too soft in the midday sun, and we both wound up 80 feet down inside that crevasse. And down inside those crevasses, it's solid ice around you, and you're in a small crack, almost like being in a narrow alleyway between two buildings. And it's so dark down there because the light doesn't penetrate through the ice. So it was a deep dark blue with just a little bit of light coming in from the surface 80 feet above my head. And very sadly, my partner Mike was critically injured in the fall and passed away very quickly, and I was down inside the crevasse, terrified at being there and devastated at the loss of my good friend, and trapped 80 feet down in this crevasse on a small snow ledge looking up. And, boy, I got to tell you, I was so scared I thought it wasn't real. I thought maybe that I, too, had died in the fall and it was some sort of trick of my mind, but I was in so much physical pain and so much fear that I realized, no, I think if I was passed away, I wouldn't feel as bad. I think I'm still alive, and I really am trapped in this terrible, fearful situation of being down there alone with my good friend passed away, and I'm trapped on this small ledge inside the glacier.
That is amazing. I can't really imagine how your emotions, from first being elated and overjoyed, well, just climbing the mountain, first of all,
yep,
is one emotion because of the fatigue and the challenges that took place on trying to climb the mountain, and then getting to the summit and being excited. But then on the way down, having to go through the terrifying emotions of, am I going to make it? Am I going to survive? Plus your friend and your partner who was critically injured and later passed away. All those emotions are going through your mind, and it just shows you, when you say being resilient, that is an incredible example or testimonial of what that means. Because I just can't imagine how many folks could have made it through that storm.
Well, thank you. It was at the time, of course, I was terrified out of my mind to be down there and overwhelmed with having lost my friend. And you're right. I mean, we were high atop the mountain. We were physically high. We were spiritually high. And then just a few hours later, my friend is gone, and I'm trapped deep inside this glacier at the lowest point we could possibly be, both emotionally and physically. And it is quite a turnaround. I mean, it's like you're going through life and everything's going great, and then suddenly a doctor gives you very bad news, or suddenly you're laid off, and you wonder, how am I going to get through this? How did I get here? It seems too terrible to even be real sometimes, and that's what it was like being down there. And I got to tell you, at that moment, I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel strong. I felt scared and weak and afraid, but I realized that I couldn't just give up. I felt the urge to just sort of cry and sit down in the snow and say goodbye to the world, but I've been taught things by my partner, Mike, about always giving your best for the team. And my dad had taught me, working for construction, that you don't quit just because it's hard. You don't give up when people are counting on you. And so even though I felt overwhelmed and I felt like not even trying, because climbing up this overhanging wall of ice seemed way out of my league as a climber, I realized I couldn't just sit there and not try. I had to give it my best. I owed it to my partner, Mike. I owed it to my things my dad had taught me, and it was my job to do my best no matter what. Even if I failed, I had to do my best to be true to the values I'd been taught by others. And so I started gathering the gear, and I started getting ready to climb that ice wall. And I didn't even believe that it would work, but I knew that I had to give it my all. And as it turns out, after 5 incredibly difficult hours and a lot of falls and spitting up some blood and a lot of doubt and difficulty, I managed to climb up that overhanging ice wall and get up that 80 feet just using some minimal climbing equipment and some rope techniques that I'd never used before, and I'd never even imagined I would have to use them. But it just goes to show how resilient human beings can be. We can take what seems to be an unbearable load and struggle through it and start to turn it around. And that kind of resilience, that's part of what I do now, is to try to share that message and try to encourage other people to be resilient in their life, because humans are amazing.
It's very, very unselfish. The one thing that I was listening to what you said that struck me was that you cannot give up for your partner or your father or your family. I think a lot of times in life we think about us and what is best for us and I and me, but we have to realize that there's a bigger component. Our family, our friends are counting on us. So
yes.
You gave it your all, not just for yourself, but also for the ones that you love. And that is just awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Thank you. And I think that's where some of the power, where a lot of the power comes from, because I was spitting up blood and I was pretty injured, and I thought to myself, I may or may not get out of this crevasse, but I doubt I'm going to live very long because I'm spitting up blood. There must be something wrong with me. I don't know if I can deal with the mental and spiritual stress of having lost my friend. I thought, well, if I'm going to die anyways, why go through all this? Maybe I should just quit early, and avoid the pain and suffering. But I realized I couldn't do that because I owed it to everyone else to do my best. For my partner Mike, is what he taught me, and to let his parents know what happened. And that's where the strength came from. It didn't come from me. I didn't have enough inside me to tackle that. It was doing it for others is what gave me the strength to keep clawing at the wall hour after hour when it just got harder and I got weaker and I began to wind down, but I realized I had to keep going for others. And I think that's the secret, Chris, is to look inside yourself. And like you said, it might be because of our family, our friends, our faith, our honor code, whatever it is that powers you, that's where your strength and resilience are going to be when you need it the most.
Exactly. And really, that kind of leads to my next question is I've heard some of your speeches, and you have coined the phrase survival voice in terms when overcoming inconceivable circumstances, and what you just mentioned is definitely is one of those. What exactly is a survival voice, and do we all have one?
I believe we do. I think it's the voice you hear in your head, and sometimes you're having a little discussion in your head, and you're thinking, I don't want to do this report by tomorrow. I'm too tired today. And that other little voice says, oh, come on, you can do it. And it's that little discussion that goes on in your head, and you kind of feel drawn a little bit. You don't want to do the work. You need to do the work. And when you get in a real difficult situation, it seems almost like the survival voice is like the mediator voice. It's you listening to both the logical side and the emotional side, your IQ versus your EQ, and it's almost like you're in the middle being a referee, and you have to listen to those different voices and then figure out the best course of action. You can't just give in to an emotion that says, oh, I'll just quit, I don't want to do this. You've got to listen to the other side and say, no, Chris, you're going to have to get that piece of work done to take care of your family, to take care of that client. And that survival voice is almost like the mediator that listens to those two extreme voices and then finds a way through. So some people will say, don't listen to the voices in your head. It may mean you're getting a little crazy, but I think it's important to listen to those voices on the extremes, weigh what they're telling you, and then find a solution that balances what those different voices are telling you.
Definitely. I know even setting a small goal, you may have a voice inside you that says you can do it or maybe you should think again. But on a higher level, when it comes down to life or not living, to really say, hey, I need to get this done. Somehow we got to find a way. I don't know how, but we got to do it right now.
Exactly.
And what you went through just shows how strong that voice was to say, Jim, we had to get out of here, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it. It's just really incredible what you went through once again, and now we all have that voice inside of us. We just have to listen to it, and not just listen, but act upon that voice inside.
You got it, exactly. And it is both. You're absolutely right about that. It's to listen to the voice and then start acting. We can't just sit back and wait for somebody else to come along and save us. You've got to start doing the hard work right now, and then maybe the situation will get easier. Maybe somebody else will give you a hand. Maybe you'll think of something new. Maybe divine intervention will step in and help you through the toughest parts. But you've got to start tackling the problem and start acting. That's the only way to turn around a tough situation. I agree.
What has mountain climbing taught you about resiliency, and what lessons can be transferred into ordinary life?
It's a good question. In climbing, when we're climbing, whether it may be a 100-foot tall rock cliff or big tall mountains, 26,000 feet like I've climbed to, and 29,000 feet including Mount Everest, it's not every step of the way is difficult. Sometimes it's a little easier, and then you get to a tough part. And the tough part, climbers call that the crux. And that's the short, difficult section. It could be a few feet. It might be a few days, depending on the size of the climb. And what I've learned from climbing is that you have to climb through the cruxes. If you stop at the crux and stare at it and start thinking about how hard it's going to be and how much work it's going to be and how things might go wrong, and if things go wrong, now what's that going to lead? What's that failure going to lead to? You can get basically psyched out by the crux. And so what good climbers do is they know the crux is coming, and they keep their momentum up. So you keep climbing, you put in some protection to give yourself some confidence. So we put little pieces of metal in the rock or turn giant ice screws into the ice face so that we know if we fall that there'll be some backup. But the trick is to keep moving through the crux. And I think the same thing happens in life, whether it's a business challenge or a personal challenge. It's easy to get psyched out and think, oh, this thing has gone wrong, and if that goes wrong, I could lose my house, and then we'll be on the streets. And you start psyching yourself out. Instead, keep moving. Be willing to act even when you're not exactly sure if you're on the right track. By moving forward and keeping momentum rolling, you will find a way through it. And so that's the kind of thing I do in my presentations and in my book, is to share those mountain climbing stories as examples so people can see, that's what I need to do, is try and keep it rolling and find a reason to keep fighting back. And so mountain climbing's got a lot of lessons about resiliency. I mean, you think about the factors that come into resiliency, whether it's tenacity, perseverance, optimism, being goal-driven, not turning back just when things get tough, to come back again and again and find other ways. All those traits that make a good climber also make a good human being, a good partner in life, a good partner in business, someone who's not going to quit just when things get a little bit rough. And that's what I try and do in my presentations, is to share those stories and share those lessons so that people can apply them to their day-to-day life.
The one thing that I've taken away from watching your videos and speaking with you now is how professional and how dedicated you are to setting your goal. And no matter what happens, you're focused on getting to that goal no matter what. You take what you do seriously. And you have an acronym called Act Like a Pro.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain a little more about this acronym and what does it mean?
I use that phrase, act like a pro, and the pro, all the letters are capitalized, P-R-O. And what that stands for is perseverance, resilience, and optimism. And I think you need all three. And we were just about on this point a minute ago, Chris, and you said you've got to act, and you're absolutely right. And that's why I say act like a pro. To be perseverant, to get through those tough times. When you encounter other difficulties and you get knocked down, to be resilient, to bounce back again and say, all right, we're going to try it again, or we're going to try it different now that we're a little bit wiser and a little bit smarter. And also the optimism that there is a way to solve this problem. There is a way to get up this overhanging ice wall. So when you encounter those difficulties, we may feel as emotional humans like sitting down on the ledge and having ourselves a cry and not trying anymore, but we can't do that. We need to act like a pro and be perseverant, resilient, and optimistic. That's how big challenges get tackled. That's how big challenges get overcome.
Very, very inspiring. I feel very empowered just speaking with you because it's incredible. I know our listeners are really taking in this and really excited about what you're saying, because no matter what, you just have to keep going. You have to keep fighting. And you're a great example of that. So this is really awesome.
Well, thank you, Chris.
But in the little time we have remaining, Jim, I'd like to ask you again about your relationship with Mike Price.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike was a dear friend of yours and a climbing partner. And I'd just like to ask you about Mike and what he meant to you and how you were keeping his memory alive. Yeah,
thanks, Chris. Mike and I were good friends for 6 years and climbing partners, and we did all kinds of things, rock climbing and skiing and mountain climbing. And he was an outdoor instructor. He worked for Colorado Outward Bound, and he'd take youth out into the woods and teach them. It looked like he was teaching them how to backpack and mountain climb and canoe and things like that, and he was, but of course he was really teaching them about how to look inside themselves and find their personal strengths and be willing to do hard work to help out themselves and others around him. That's what Mike did in his career before he passed away on Mount Rainier with me, when we were together on Mount Rainier. And so when he passed away, I thought, how can I honor him a little bit? I mean, I was so sad at his loss, and he helped out so many people when he was an instructor for Outward Bound. So it took me a little time to figure it out, but what I started doing was a couple things. I started teaching young people in the elementary schools how to rock climb. They had artificial rock climbing walls in the gym, and I would go there and I would teach other parents how to teach the students. So I would train the trainers and we would train the kids on how to climb the walls. And we would get literally hundreds of kids every week climbing these rock walls in the gymnasium. And I'll tell you, getting those little first graders up and down the wall, that was some of the scariest things I've ever done in climbing, Chris. It was wild. It was wild. But I got so much out of teaching the young kids how to climb, and then I also went on and started teaching rock and ice climbing and high-altitude expeditioning to college students who wanted to go on their first expeditions around the world. And so I would teach them the interpersonal skills as well as the climbing skills, how to be a good team member. And that eventually led to me starting to speak. I realized that some of the things that I learned from Mike I could share with others, and some of the things I learned by surviving on Rainier I could share with others. And so I became a full-time professional speaker. I'm a motivational speaker, and I speak about resilience, and I have workshops, like you say. And I realized that I wanted to get out the story about Mike's life and what he had taught me and what I had learned on climbing on Mount Rainier. And so I co-wrote a book with my writing partner, Kevin Vaughn, and we wrote a book called The Ledge. And that's out there in paperback now and audiobooks and ebooks. And so that's what I do now is I'm a full-time speaker and a writer, and I distill the lessons out of these adventure stories and try and pass them on to other people so that they can be empowered and be resilient when their time comes. And I think that's part of the way I honor Mike, is that I try and pick up his work a little bit of helping other people become stronger and better versions of themselves. and sharing the lessons. And so that's how I try to carry on his work a little bit and do my work while I'm still fortunate enough to still be here.
Well, Jim, we're very thankful for you. We're thankful for Mike and his memory. And we are just so honored that you could join us on the Overcome Your Limits radio show. And I'd just like to ask, how can our audience contact you and find out more about you and your website and your workshop and your speaking engagements and all that good stuff?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You can find me on the web at www.speakingofadventure.com. Speakingofadventure.com, because that's what I do. I speak of adventure and share the lessons. And our book is out there called The Edge, like I said. And if you go to the webpage at speakingofadventure.com, there's videos on there that people can get a sample of some of the lessons, and my phone number's on there and all that stuff. And love to hear from people. Of course, like you, Chris, I'm on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. I use the name Climber Jim on Twitter, so I'd love to hear from some of your listeners and pass some stories back and forth about strength and resilience, because I'm always learning as well, too. And I really appreciate you giving me a chance to share the stories and get a chance to talk to your listeners. I really appreciate the opportunity, Chris.
Well, Jim, we are honored, and we are so pleased that you could join us on the Overcome Your Limits radio show. And we must have you back again. So we really thank you, Jim Davidson, for being on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris, and keep up the great work.
Thank you for listening to the Overcome Your Limits radio show with motivational speaker Christopher E. Powell. Tune in regularly to get the insight, inspiration, and motivation you need to dramatically improve your life and make a difference in the lives of others. We encourage you to continue the conversation online and let us know your thoughts at overcomeyourlimits.com, as well as to sign up for our newsletter. Until next time, in the words of Chris Powell, when you possess the will to win, there are no limits that you can't overcome.